It's a great pleasure to welcome George Galloway to the Literary Festival and to Karachi. And it's a testimony to his huge popularity that he was practically not being allowed to come to the stage, but I'm glad to have him up here now. And before we start, I'd just like to say that for somebody who has never held public office, George Galloway is probably the most recognized and respected British politician in or out of Britain. And largely it's because of the principles he stuck to throughout his political life. Sorry, can you wait a minute? So, and also to the fact that he has stuck to his positions despite the fact that the easier way would have been to go with the flow. Now, Mr. Galloway, can I call you George? George entered politics, I believe, at the very tender age of 13 years when he joined the Labour Party. And the Labour Party has been his political home until he was forced to leave because of his opposition to the Iraq War. And his tremendous efforts in organizing the coalition against the war in 2001 onwards, and I joined the 2 Million Man March in London, he's been a tremendous moral force in showing British politicians a mirror and telling them what the right path is. Today, of course, everybody knows that the war was started on a lie, but George Galloway has consistently said that when it was very unpopular, and he was forced to leave the party. And then, of course, he formed his own Respect Party and defeated the Labour contender in London constituency. Then he's sparked off the most stunning political upset in British history by winning in Bradford. And as I said, he has been tremendous voice of the conscience of the British people, and he has a huge following throughout the world, not just in Britain. So before we open up, and I'll give you a lot of time, half an hour, for the question and answer session. But to start with, George, you've been in public life a long time. When you look around you and see the state of human rights, do you think things have improved since you entered political life, or are they worse?
Irfan and brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, let me, if I may, express my gratitude to the organizers for the opportunity to return to Karachi after almost 25 years. The last time I was in Karachi, I was campaigning in the Liare constituency for the late Benazir Bhutto. I had a very warm welcome there. I went around with the tallest man in the world at that time, Mr. Chenna, I think his name was. He used to pick me up and hold me like a mascot. And but all those years, 1988 until now, I haven't been in Karachi. So thank you for the opportunity to address this wonderful crowd. As to your question, Irfan, I would put it this way. In the medium term, I think the days of empire and injustice are dying. I think the sun is setting on the empires. When I was a child, it used to be said that the sun never set on the British Empire. But as my Irish grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. And I had no cause to doubt him then or now. My apologies to the Deputy High Commissioner if he's here, but I'm afraid that's my view. I honestly think that the days of empire and injustice are setting, but of course even a dying body has its death throes, which can be violent and hurtful, harmful, and we're experiencing many of these death throes until now. But I think that the ideas of freedom, of liberty, and of democracy, which needn't be Westminster democracy, that's one of the great myths, I think, that there's only one kind of democracy, one form of democracy, but government accountable to the people is the real definition of democracy, in my view. I think those days are dawning, and I'm very optimistic for the future, and I pray to God that I'll live long enough to see that sun really rising.
Amen. Thank you, George. Now, George, you entered politics at the precocious age of 13. When at a time when most kids are playing football and cricket, what took you into politics at that age?
Well, I was born into a political household. My father was a trade union and labour activist. My mother, an Irish Republican immigrant into the country. I joined the Labour Party at 13. I was in it for 36 years until Mr. Blair expelled me. You put it more kindly, but he expelled me in 2003 because of my role in the opposition to the Iraq War. I attended my first demonstration marching behind my leader at that time, a Pakistani called Tariq Ali, who I think is quite well known. I was 14 years old. It was 1968, and we were in Grosvenor Square in our hundreds of thousands demonstrating against the American war on Vietnam. Tariq was our leader then, young, dashing, handsome Pakistani chap, and he's still going, by the way, still going strong. But that demonstration, as you know because you were there, was dwarfed by the one that is virtually exactly 10 years ago today, the 2 million march against the war in Iraq, which was the biggest ever demonstration in British history. So I've lived a long political life, but I never regretted spending my life in politics. It was in my blood, and it's in my children's blood. MashaAllah, I have many children, and all of them, even the smallest, are always asking me, when's the next demonstration, Daddy?
So, George, you went to Beirut in 1977, and I believe that was transformative event, because since then you've taken up the cause of Palestine and Palestinians in a way few public figures have. You've also been very active in supporting the right of Kashmiris to choose their own destiny, and for that, I mean, you become hugely popular across the Muslim world. Now, tell me little about Beirut. What happened there? What did you see that got you so involved?
Well, I went with a group of people for a week, and I stayed 11 months. Because the late President Arafat, whom it was my privilege to be adopted by, took a liking to me and invited me to stay, and in the end had to order me to leave on the principle that I had been offered a job in the Labour Party, and he said, you'll do more for us there than you will here. We have enough soldiers here, we have enough martyrs here. So go back and take up this job, and he almost had to force me on the plane. I had a very beautiful Palestinian girlfriend there who used to have a rifle, an AK-47 over her shoulder. It was a very romantic period in my life. She's now a mother of 6, and we're still in touch, but I shan't tell you her name for the protection of our reputation. But of course I was absorbed into the Palestinian revolution at that time. I spent a lot of time in the camps, living in the camps, and thereafter I knew every time they talked about Palestinian terrorists that the Palestinians were in fact the victims of one of the greatest acts of terrorism in modern times. More recently, I've been running convoys to Gaza to break the siege on Gaza, imposed on the people of Gaza for one reason only, that they had the temerity to vote in a democratic election for a government that the big powers and Israel didn't like. I don't much like them myself. I'm not a Hamas supporter, as I've made clear. I'm an Arafatist. But what counts is the Palestinians elected them, and yet the response was to starve them to death, to punish them. And so I ran 5 convoys, breaking the siege of Gaza, fighting our way literally through various Arab dictatorships, some of which are now gone, I'm glad to say. I was deported from Egypt by Mubarak. The little man from the foreign ministry declared me persona non grata. He said, "You will never enter Egypt again, ever." I told him, ever is a long time. But here's my prediction, I said. I will enter Egypt again, and the dictator that you work for will end up behind bars, if not hanging from a noose. And certainly the former has now happened. The dictatorships of the Arab world are now falling. The Palestinian cause will in the end be the major beneficiary, or a major beneficiary of that. And I'm very proud of the role that I've been able to play in the struggle of the Palestinian people. I think they are an example without comparison, actually, of a people who by their resistance maintained their existence. It would have been very easy for them to go into the museum of ex-nations, but they, by resisting, continued to exist. And I'm proud that I've played a small part in that. And I always say to them, I don't know if I myself will see a free Palestine, but I'm sure that my sons will. And all I ask is that you tell them, if you see them, that you remember their father.
George, a few years ago you were summoned before a Senate subcommittee in Washington to answer questions about allegations to do with oil and so forth, and you made mincemeat out of them. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Well, until the Bradford by-election victory 11 months ago, I would have described it as the best day of my life. Yep. I insisted, in fact, on appearing in front of that Senate committee because without reference to me and without my knowledge even, they had traduced me in front of the world. It's a big YouTube hit. Now, if you haven't watched it, you can find it on YouTube. Millions of people have watched it. It was a day that I shall never forget. I felt that God gave me wings that day. I found the words because they were all inside my heart and inside my head. It was a chance to confront injustice at the court of the Sultan. They were not used to people talking to them like that. I used to be a boxer, in fact, and so I am, if anyone else here has ever been a boxer, when you're in a ring, you can see in your opponent's eyes whether he wants to be there or not, whether he fancies this contest or not. And I can honestly say that I looked into the eyes of these senators and I could tell that they wished they were anywhere in the world except where they were currently sitting, but they could do nothing about it. In boxing, at least you can throw in the towel. But they couldn't throw in the towel because the whole of the world's television cameras were covering it live. So they had to listen to what I had to say and know that those words would travel because they represented the feelings of billions of people around the world. Iraq was invaded and destroyed and broken into pieces, and 1 million of its people killed, and 3 million scattered outside as refugees, the country shattered into sectarian fiefdoms. all on the basis of a tower of lies. And they had to face the fact that this was now being exposed to the world in this televised hearing. And again, I'm very proud of that day. They didn't like it much. The Inquisitor-in-Chief is now an ex-senator, and I'm back for the 6th time as a British parliamentarian. So it was a victory for the House of Commons over the US Senate. Thank you.
Now, some of the tabloid press in London, England, has given you the nickname of Gorgeous George Galloway. So, do you enjoy this image, this flamboyant image, this very combative debater? Is this
Well,
something?
it's just me, Irfan. You know, I don't have any affectations or side. I am who I am, what I am. You know, Prince became the artist formerly known as Prince. Well, I'm the artist formerly known as Gorgeous George. I've definitely lost whatever good looks I had, but the style, flamboyant you say, is just my natural persona. And I think in a world where politicians are almost uniformly grey, where Tweedledee fights it out with Tweedledum, or as I put it rather more rudely, if a backside could have two cheeks, it's this party and that party, political backside. I think people are attracted to someone who's different and who is perceived, I hope, as someone who tells what they believe to be the truth, whether right or wrong. And I have been wrong. I was wrong sometime in 1975. I think I was wrong. I'm joking. I can be wrong, I can be right, but you can be sure of one thing, that what I'm saying to you is what I sincerely believe. I don't say it because it might please you. I don't not say it for fear of displeasing you. I'm loyal to my ideas. I'm sitting with my sister Sanam now. I was with the Bhutto family since Mr. Bhutto was under sentence of death, and I will remain with them until my last breath because I'm loyal to the people and the things that I believe in.
Now, by sheer chance, there was an article in The Guardian yesterday in which the writer argued that the 2 million march over 10 years ago has changed British politics forever. Would you agree, and to what extent do you think that's true?
I do, Irfan, but not for a good purpose so far as the political class is concerned. I think that the Iraq War and Mr. Blair's role in it shot through fatally the credibility of the British political system. And I think you can date the massive increase in abstention in British elections, the tremendous splintering of British political opinion, back to that mendacity, perfidy, perpetrated by Tony Blair. And somebody said to me, will you never stop speaking about the war? I say I'll stop speaking about it when I see Tony Blair in handcuffs at The Hague, facing tribunal for the crimes that he committed. Nobody any longer believes anything that the British political class tell them. And they don't believe anything that the British media class tell them. And we know from the recent travails of Mr. Rupert Murdoch and his empire that nobody believes the media because the media is seen as, correctly, the echo chamber of the political class. It's what Dr. Johnson called the dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy, which he declared to be the grimmest dictatorship of them all. The politicians have a view, the media echoes it, and the public are stupefied, stunned, or tricked into believing it and following it. But fewer and fewer people buy newspapers now in England. Fewer and fewer people believe what they read in them. fewer and fewer people believe what they see on the mainstream television. The fastest growing television station in Britain was the one that I continue to work for, Press TV, which you can get here, but you can't get in England because the British government took it off the air because it was doing so fantastically well. Now the fastest growing TV station in England is Russia Today, which I commend to you all, which I think is the best news station anywhere in the world. The Bush and Blair Corporation, formerly known as the BBC, is the last place to go to for the truth about what's happening in the world. And all of this is a crisis that dates back to the anti-war movement and the struggle to halt the war. The Iraqis paid a very high price for it, but it will be seen in history as a decisive turning point when the credibility of the prevailing orthodoxy finally began to crumble away. So as one of the leaders of that anti-war movement, I count it as a singular achievement.
Now, you know the Arab world better than most people. How do you see the Arab Spring evolving? What direction do you think it's going to take?
Well, I always say to people in the Arab world, look, revolution is a process, it's not an event. It's not something that happens and then it's over. The French Revolution took more than 10 years. The Bolshevik Revolution more than 5 years. And the Arab Revolution is only 1 or 2 years old. So it's not finished yet, and we can't predict with certainty the outcome. In any case, the outcome, to borrow Lenin's famous phrase, will be in some cases 2 steps forward, 1 step back, possibly even 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You can't pre-script the outcome. The one thing you can say is that revolution is underway now in the Arab world and it will not be stopped. And we may like or we may not like the outcome as it happens. I like some, I don't like others. But it's not about me, and with respect to this audience, not about you. It's certainly not about the Americans. I was the driver, chauffeur in London for many great people, Benazir one of them, Sheikh Rashid Ghanouchi another, who's now in charge in Tunisia. There are a lot of troubles there, but I still believe that his attempt to synthesize Islam and progressive politics, his red-green alliance idea, is the right way forward for the Muslim world. I didn't support President Morsi. I supported another of the former historic leaders of the Ikhwan for the presidency, but he didn't succeed. But President Morsi was elected. He has to be given a chance. I don't agree with those who are on the streets trying to bring him down. I think that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt have a right to govern. On the other hand, I don't much fancy the stripe of the so-called revolutionaries in Syria on the basis that a revolution supported by Britain, the United States and Israel, and which has terrified the religious and ethnic minorities and the women in Syria with what might happen if the revolution triumphs, is probably not a good thing. And I figure if Saudi Arabia and Qatar are funding it, they're probably not funding it for the best reason, because they don't fund anything for the best reason. So I have a discriminating approach to it, but the Syrians have the right to overthrow their government, like anybody has the right to overthrow their government, peacefully and democratically, if that's possible, by force of arms and mass power, if not. But there are many candidates for the chop before the Syrian regime, in my opinion. And it's passing strange that all these jihadists are taking money from treacherous collaborating regimes in order to overthrow the one remaining Arab regime which has resisted Israel and protected and supported the resistance. which is, of course, the reason why they're trying to overthrow it.
Thank you. Now, I'm sure many of you have questions. If you could raise your hand. There's one lady there. Do you have a mic, please? Hello. Any of the organizers here? Could organize a mic, please? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to Pakistan.
Thank you.
I was a little perturbed by your loyalty to the Bhutto family in particular, given that you support democratic and I assume non-feudal and progressive movements in the rest of the world. So perhaps if you are supporting democracy and the right of the people and voice and accountability in the Middle East, you would share that sentiment also in Pakistan. Because one of our fundamental problems in this country is elite capture.
Well, I did say that I didn't come here to please you. I came here to tell you what I believe. And I can't help that. That's my nature. As far as I know, the Bhutto family were elected, which makes them democratic. And you may not like the democratic choice of the people, but that's what we have to live with in democratic politics. Heaven knows I despair that the British people democratically chose David Cameron and Nick Clegg, but I can't disinvent them because they won the election at least together. I don't pretend that everything in the well, let me say first of all, the risk of upsetting others. I think that Mr. Bhutto was the best leader that Pakistan ever had, and I wish that he had lived. And if he had lived, I think Pakistan would be a better place today. I had very close friendship with Benazir Bhutto from the day that she arrived in London in 1983 until the day that she died. But as Sanam knows, I had many political disagreements with her. She never took my advice on some important points, and I wish that she had. But when I survey the political scene, I never found anybody better than the People's Party to govern Pakistan. There are others, and the people may choose them, but that won't change my loyalty. As to feudal, you know, I don't think that people's background should be held against them. After all, the greatest of all the leftist politicians in Britain was and remains, though he's now very old, Mr. Anthony Wedgwood Benn, the former Viscount Stansgate. Should we hold it against him that he had blue blood? I think not. The question is whether you are ready to betray your class. There was a very great story of Molotov when he was the Soviet foreign minister, and he was the son of a count. In fact, he was a count, Count Molotov. And he spoke to Ernest Bevin, a working class man like me, who became the British Foreign Secretary. And Count Molotov said to Ernest Bevin, "You and I have one thing in common." "What's that?" said Bevin roughly. He said, "We're both traitors to our class." And Mr. Bhutto in particular was a traitor to his class. He wanted to disinherit the feudals. He wanted to distribute the land to the masses. He wanted to take into public ownership the commanding heights of the economy, which people have not forgiven. And I know now many bourgeois and petty bourgeois Pakistanis who hate the Bhuttos because they challenged the power of the rich and the feudal class here in Pakistan. That's my view.
Thank you, George, for that very comprehensive reply. There's a lady here in the front. Right, you. Yes. Sorry, can we have the mic here, please? And excuse me, could you just stay in the front, please, with the mic? So,
Yes, hello. I just wanted to ask, as happening to Julian Assange?
Well, it's a very good question. What's happening to Julian Assange? I'm a frequent visitor to the Ecuador embassy, where he is currently incarcerated in a very small room. He hasn't seen the sunlight for some 7 or 8 months. He's sick. He needs treatment, but the British government have besieged and blockaded the Ecuador embassy. They have refused all entreaties to find a solution to this matter. Julian Assange has offered to meet with the Swedish prosecutorial authorities in London, which the Swedish authorities have frequently done with other alleged criminals. He has promised to return to Sweden to face questioning if the Swedish government gives an assurance that they will not further extradite him to the United States. The Swedish government has refused this. The Ecuador government has even offered to transfer Julian Assange to political asylum in the Ecuador embassy in Sweden, so that the police could come in and question him there, and the Swedish authorities have refused it. So if you can't smell a rat in that picture, then your sense of smell has been dulled. It's a big rat, and it's this: they are determined to get vengeance against Julian Assange, the greatest whistleblower in history, who unmasked their dirty, sordid dealings, which have been responsible for the deaths of millions of people over recent years. If Julian Assange did only one thing in his life that was worth everything, it was the cockpit video that he brought to us of the American pilots shooting down children and men in the streets of Iraq whilst gloating over it as if it were a video game. That one piece of footage proved how ugly, how dirty the games of the big powers are. And I don't know about you, I feel that a man like Assange was easily set up. He was evidently a sexually promiscuous person. Such people can easily be seduced by groupies, and I believe that's exactly what happened. And one of them, at least, turns out to be, as you may or may not know, I have very close relations with Cuba, and I know the Cuban leadership very well, and I can testify to you that one of Julian Assange's accusers was herself deported from Cuba for anti-Castro activity, that she was an employee of an anti-Castro group based in Miami, Florida, and she ended up in bed with Julian Assange. And again, if you can't smell a rat in that picture, then you need to wake up and smell the coffee.
thank you. Now, sorry, I'm trying to look for somebody at the back. Yes, Hamid, could you take the mic there to the gentleman, please?
First of all, George, no disrespect, but I think smoking in public places should be avoided. So I hope you'll forgive me for my remarks.
He may, I won't. But carry on.
I apologize, no disrespect meant. But like you, my question to you, sir, is do you see an Arab type, have a nice puff, do you see Arab type uprising happening in Pakistan? And if not, what could be the reason?
I don't see an Arab type uprising happening in Pakistan. I think Mr. Kadri tried that just a few weeks ago I think that it failed. And it failed because there is enough democratic space currently in Pakistan that people can exercise their rights in other ways. But there have been times, of course, when there was armed struggle in Pakistan, there was mass politics on the streets under military dictatorships. I myself, let me tell you a secret, in the 1980s, I was an underground agent in Pakistan for the movement for the restoration of democracy here, for which I was awarded the Hilal-e-Qaid-e-Azam in the late 1980s. I worked under the leadership of the late Nawabzada Nasrullah Khan. He used to smoke in public places. In fact, I was once in a hotel with him when he was smoking his shisha in a hotel room, and I warned him that the smoke detector was bound to go off, but he had this cockamamie theory that because he had an electric bar instead of a flame, that it wouldn't trigger the smoke alarm. But it did, and we all ended up outside the hotel, and I told him, please don't own up that it was us, or Kashmir is finished. Anyway, I used to travel the country, distributing funds and other messages to the people who were fighting against the military dictatorship then of the hangman Zia-ul-Haq. And in those days, of course, when there was dictatorship in Pakistan, the people had every right to rise up against their dictator, and there was no other alternative but to do that. But at the moment, I think there is sufficient democratic space for the people of Pakistan to get their rights by other means.
Thank you. There's this lady here. Could we have the mic here, please? Okay, since you are there. No. Excuse me. There's this gentleman right next to you there.
Hi, my name is Mehboob. I just want to ask one question that you support Palestinian cause. Even I'm a supporter of that. But I want to ask that a country which is divided into two parts, PLO and Hamas, a nation that is not united in their own ranks, how can you defend that? Like, how can we as an individual from Britain or Pakistan support when they are not united within themselves?
Well, I think, of course, that's a strong point. But of course, I would defend the Palestinian cause if they were divided into 100 parts. Because the people of Palestine have the right to return to their country, whatever their political differences are amongst each other. But I have constantly urged unity amongst them, and alhamdulillah, that's happening now. And the president of Palestine is here, I think, in Pakistan now. He wouldn't have been my choice for president, personally, but that's not the point. He's the Palestinian president, not my president. And I think that the Egyptian government of President Morsi has played a good role in helping to reconcile and reunite the two forces of Fatah and Hamas. But actually, something important is happening in Palestine you may not be fully aware of, which is that both of these main parties are losing support. Hamas support is down. Fatah's support is very severely down because of perceived failures in the PNA authority, corruption, and so on. And some of the foolishness of the Hamas government. I see that they banned hip-hop, for example, in Gaza the other day, which seems a particularly perverse piece of prioritizing when you have the sea of troubles that they face. The main party in Palestine now is the others, the people who are not with any of the parties, who are with independents. There's a renaissance of leftist parties in Palestine. For example, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine has become very much stronger recently. Islamic Jihad, which is not Hamas, which has a less austere approach to Islam than Hamas, is also on the rise. So there are many changes taking place. But definitely, when President Arafat was alive, the Palestinians had one address, and that address was him. And that made them stronger than they have been since he was murdered. I say that very clearly and candidly. President Arafat was murdered by Israel, and he was murdered with the collaboration of some in his circle, for he could not be murdered by Israel otherwise. And that's why they got rid of President Arafat, because he was that one address. And it's better for the enemies of Palestine to have a splintered Palestinian polity than a united one.
Thank you. Sorry.
One question. You said that.
Sorry, just 1 second. Could you just wait, please? There are other people who are asking before you. We just have the mic. Just bring the mic. I'm sorry. I'll come back to you, but there's somebody here. We haven't been this side at all. There's this gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Ibrahim. I just have a question. At the start, you mentioned that the empires are coming to an end. I was a bit confused when I heard that, because what the situation we have in this country, for instance, is that we've had, very sort of simplistically looking, a warfare that went on in Afghanistan, and which then spread across to Pakistan. And now we have a country which has nuclear weapons, one of the largest armies in the world, one of the biggest Muslim countries in the world, and it is being attacked by drones against 200 million people, which are against that, by what you would think in a democratic country, led possibly as a puppet regime, where people don't want this.
Sorry, is this a question? Is this a question or a statement?
Yeah, I'm just coming to the question.
Yes, please,
the question is, how do you see that we're at the end of the empires when we are actually extending unconventional warfare in countries without even having any combat?
Well, I did say that even a dying man can cause a lot of damage in the death throes, and I think that part of these death throes is being played out here in Afghanistan and now crossed into Pakistan. Let me preface my remarks by saying I think that Pakistan has and has had far too great dependence upon the United States of America. And I don't really understand it, because you have a historic friendship with China, which is a power that's rising and you ought to be closer to, rather than constantly looking thousands of miles away to the United States of America, which doesn't care a damn about you and is ready to bomb and drone and rocket you at the drop of a hat without even taking leave of the government of Pakistan. I think that the West's policy towards the East is flawed in general, and in Pakistan and Afghanistan you can see it with crystal clarity. If you'll forgive me quoting myself, I told Mrs. Thatcher to her face in Parliament on the eve of the fall of Kabul, to those that she and President Reagan were fond of describing as freedom fighters, mujahideen, the fathers of the Taliban, the fathers of Al-Qaeda. I told her to her face that you have opened the gates to the barbarians, and a long dark night will now descend upon the people of Afghanistan. And I believed that. I was the last man standing in the British Parliament, literally, defending the Najibullah government in Afghanistan. which I believe was the best government that Afghanistan has ever had. The only government that ever built women's universities, girls' schools, tried to free the people, tried to break up the feudal tenure, and so on. The reason that we have, indeed, I asked David Cameron at Prime Minister's Question Time just 2 weeks ago, did he read the novel Frankenstein? And did he read it to the end? Dr. Frankenstein created a monster, and at the end of the novel, the monster broke free. That's why it's called a monster. And by building up the forces of fanaticism on the principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend, they created a monster that the rest have to deal with. And now the people of Afghanistan, to whom bin Laden was sent by the West in the first place, are still being killed by the West for having once had bin Laden in their country when we sent him there and facilitated his entire operations there through stooge regimes like the Mubarak dictatorship and the Saudi dictatorship and so on. So I think the policy in Afghanistan is profoundly flawed. Pakistan paid a very high price for that policy, both in the 80s and until now. And I hope and I pray, actually, that this extremism that has been generated by Western policy does not spread irredeemably here. I put it this way in New York, in my now famous debate with the late Christopher Hitchens, that it seemed to Western leaders and public that the aeroplanes which struck the Twin Towers on 9/11 had come out of a clear blue sky. But in fact, they had emerged from a swamp of hatred and bitterness at the injustice and double standards of Western policy towards the East. And the only way to deal with a swamp is to drain it. You can invest in all the fly swats that you like, but you will never stop what comes out of a swamp. You have to drain the swamp, and the only way to drain the swamp is to reverse the injustice and the double standards that are your everyday currency. And that's what the West needs to do, not invest in more and more wars, more and more secret police, more and more draconian, anti-libertarian, anti-terrorism laws, and so on. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Now there's a lady here who's been very patient, right in the front row.
I was patient because part of my question has been answered. I wanted your lucid and passionate take on, as you said, BBC, but Obama's resistance to the Iranian nuclear program and their policy on it. And do you agree that Palestinians are in a state because the monetarily powerful Arab regimes sold their souls to the devil and did not come for their help, and they could have been out of this mess long time ago?
Well,
do you agree to that?
People ask me all the time, madam, can we have a European initiative? Can the foreigners somehow come to the aid of the Palestinian people? I always make this point, that the Muslims themselves could solve the Palestinian issue and could have done so decades ago. Indeed, the late King Faisal briefly tried to do so by using the oil wealth of the Arab world to force a change in Western policy towards the Arab world. But it has never been tried since, and the mere contemplation of it would move the earth because, of course, the dependence on Arab oil has become more and more salient. Let me say something that might touch you. I once, on my siege-breaking operations in Gaza, I interviewed a 12-year-old girl, then 12, who's standing in the ruins of her family house in Gaza, whose mother and father and all 5 of her brothers were killed in one rocket attack. She was now an orphan. And she asked me this question: She said, where is this ummah that they teach us about in school? Where is this ummah that they talk about in the mosque? Why did they leave us alone? On another reflection, once President Arafat asked me, did I want to accompany him to China? I was a young man, I'd hardly been out of Scotland. I was very excited. We flew all the way to China, we had a meeting at the airport, and we flew all the way back. I never saw China. But the Chinese leaders at the time put this to Arafat. They said the Muslims are not serious about recovering Palestine. If they were serious, they could all walk into Palestine and take it back. What could they do? How could they stop you? You are billions, and they are, at that time, 3 or 4 millions. So the answer to the second part of your question is very definitely so. And the Faustian pact between these Arab dictatorships and the devil is very clear for all to see. The devil keeps them in power, and in return they govern their countries in the interests of the devil. But alhamdulillah, the day of reckoning is coming in this life or the other life. Sorry, the first, shout out one word, the first part of your question. Yes, it is one of the truly bewildering, mystifying facts in the world today that few people seem to be able to see the contradiction in one country in the Middle East, which has hundreds of nuclear weapons, threatening to annihilate another country in the Middle East, which has no nuclear weapons, to punish them for maybe one day having nuclear weapons. How people cannot see that glaring contradiction is quite beyond me. Now, I don't speak for the Iranian government. Indeed, I'm about to speak entirely against them. If I were the Iranian government, I would be trying to build a nuclear weapon. Because as North Korea proves, if you have weapons of mass destruction, you will never be invaded by the United States. But if you don't have weapons of mass destruction, you run a very high risk of being invaded by the United States. I would not blame Iran at all if it built a nuclear weapon. But the Iranians are very clear. They are theologically precluded from building a nuclear weapon. Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons. The IAEA has opined many times that there is no evidence, I'm quoting directly, no evidence, unquote, that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. Yet the Iranians are being besieged, sanctioned, threatened on a daily basis by a country which itself illegally has acquired hundreds of nuclear weapons, refused to sign the NPT, refused to allow any inspections, and which has regularly invaded and occupied its neighbors. Iran hasn't invaded any country for more than 300 years. I wish we could say the same about my country.
Thank you. Now, the gentleman at the back who had the mic earlier, I think he has a question there.
Thank you. You said media, the credibility of media in Britain has been permanently damaged in the public eye. Could you say the same thing about United States? Or what do you think is the state of affairs in US?
Well, I do believe that, I mean, it's a matter of fact that newspaper sales in the United Kingdom plummet. Between 10 and 20% per year are plummeting. And the number of people watching alternative television channels in Britain is rapidly multiplying. And the number of people not watching any so-called mainstream television at all is now significant. And that's because we have so many more channels to choose from, and the technological change that has occurred in the world means that almost anyone can have a television channel. A man who owns a couple of curry shops in England can buy a television channel, and several have. That's all the wealth you need. To own a couple of curry shops, you can buy yourself a satellite TV station and get it on the Sky network, and many have. And that cost of entry into the media market is rapidly falling and will continue to fall, and will soon fall to zero, because satellites will soon be completely OTOs, and almost all television will be on the internet within the next 5 years. And so the cost of entry into the TV market will be zero. At that point, I myself will have my own television channel, alhamdulillah. Look forward to that day. And the same is happening in the United States, but with this cherry on top. Nobody dominated the United States media market in the way that people dominated the British market. First of all, newspapers are going out of business in the United States even more rapidly than they are in the UK. And secondly, no television channel has ever developed hegemonic presence in the United States, and nor any newspaper. There's no national newspaper in the United States at all. They're all regional. And the number of people who get their news now from the internet, from YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, which is the fastest possible way of getting news. And by the way, I have hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter and Facebook. Please follow me. I hope you'll go to @George Galloway at Twitter and George Galloway MP on Facebook. It's by far and away the fastest way, and I think the most accurate way, of knowing what's happening in the world. So I believe we have reached the end of the days of the media moguls. Maybe it's dawning in Pakistan, but it's definitely dying in the West, and I think that's a very good thing.
I hope that doesn't happen in my lifetime. I'll be out of a job, George.
I'm very sorry, Irfan. I'm very sorry.
Now, there was somebody there, I think. There's a gentleman there.
Hi, George. It's
Hi.
a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
You came to my university in London once and gave a talk, so I have a huge amount of respect for you. So the question I have is that in the democratic process itself, a large amount of money is required to fund the parties, A. In a place like Pakistan, where information to the poor people isn't widely available about their candidates' true intentions or their policies, votes are often by the sheep mentality, where they follow the leader. And thirdly, there's a problem where the electoral process is kind of flawed in Pakistan, where we could go to a voting booth and they say your vote has already been registered, so go home.
That happens in Bradford.
Yeah. Oh, and I voted for you from Bethnal Green, by the way.
Thank you.
But the thing is that this is the only process that works in the world. But in my opinion, it's flawed. So what do you think?
Well, Mr. Churchill famously said that democracy is the worst form of political system apart from all the others. And I think that he was right about that. Democracy is the only way. And of course, there are many, many shortcomings of democracy, some of which you have adumbrated eloquently. The extent to which money has become king certainly blights the political process in the United States. It hasn't actually in Britain. I have twice defeated all the mainstream parties, basically as a one-man show with no money at all. Trust me, I haven't got tuppence halfpenny in my pocket. But I managed to defeat the parties by the age-old tactics of getting on top of an open-top bus and driving along the streets and stopping and giving speeches, as well as accessing the free media that we have in the internet and on YouTube and so on. So it hasn't in Britain. I don't know the situation in Pakistan well enough to know the extent to which money is king here. And it's no doubt that the big parties dominate the political scene here. That's why someone self-evidently with talent like Imran Khan has not been able to break through. I think he'll probably do a little bit better in the next elections than he did in the last. Well, he didn't stand in the last, but the time before that. So it is possible to make progress, but you know, it's a bit like a ship's captain complaining about the sea, complaining about people casting your vote before you get there and so on. As I say, it happened to me a lot in Bradford. And in Ireland, where my antecedents are, it's said that the people in the graveyard vote first thing in the morning. The dead people have already cast their vote before the rest of us get up. There's no doubt a lot of spills twixt cup and lip, but it still is the only way you can really order your affairs.
Thank you. Now time for one last question. Amir?
Mr. Galloway, I just wanted to ask you one question.
So.
You very rightly paid tributes to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He set about a land reform program which was anti-feudal, that was partially implemented by the time that he was hanged. His party came to power repeatedly, and feudalism has got more and more entrenched, and all the feudal powers in Pakistan now are members of the People's Party and control it. How can we have a reform, land reform, in which feudalism is abolished, short of a revolution? Is it possible?
Well, of course, this is ultimately a matter for you. I don't think you can say the People's Party repeatedly came to power. They came to power twice, and they were overthrown twice. And they didn't have the wherewithal to carry forward the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto revolution, and times had changed. I don't think the feudals control the Pakistan People's Party. I think the Bhutto family control the Pakistan People's Party, he said, but it impressed me what he said. But the short answer to your question is, if the Pakistani people want to have a revolution, be my guest, go ahead, have a revolution. I'm the last person in the world to say don't have a revolution. I said at the beginning I wish that the revolution of Mr. Bhutto had proceeded and transformed everything in Pakistan. That would have been the best outcome for the country.
Well, on that revolutionary note, I think I'm going to thank George Galloway for giving us such a lively talk and responding to our questions. George,
thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm speaking again tomorrow night.